The rich woman mocked the stranger's seat until he said, "I own this company." The lounge was already full of noise when Diana Colton walked in. Not the kind of noise that bothers people, the quiet, expensive kind. The low hum of air conditioning set to the perfect temperature, the soft clink of glass on marble, the muffled sound of a phone call being taken in a hushed voice by a man in a gray suit near the far wall. Every sound in that room was careful, controlled, like everything else in the Emirates' first-class business lounge at Dubai International Airport. Diana did not do careful. She walked in the way she always walked into rooms, like the room had been waiting for her. Her heels clicked on the polished floor. Her coat, camel-colored and tailored to the last stitch, moved around her like something alive. Her handbag, a limited edition piece she had flown to Paris specifically to collect, hung from the crook of her arm like a trophy. She was 51 years old, and she had spent 51 years making sure that when she entered a space, people noticed. They noticed. A young couple near the entrance glanced up. A man in his 30s sitting by the juice bar paused mid-sip. Even the attendant behind the long marble counter straightened slightly, the way people do when someone with obvious authority walks into their line of sight. Diana noticed them noticing. She always did. It was one of her small, private pleasures. She had earned this, was the thing. Earned every square inch of the coat, the bag, the first-class boarding pass folded into the slim leather holder in her left hand. 23 years of running Colton Interiors, a firm she had started alone in a rented office the size of a storage cupboard, had built her into one of the most recognized interior design names in the United Kingdom. She had dressed boardrooms, hotel lobbies, private estates, and the homes of 3 different members of Parliament. She did not apologize for what she had bled for it. She scanned the lounge. The window section was the best part of the room. Everyone who used this lounge knew it. A curved row of wide seats positioned along the full-length glass wall that looked out over the runway, where planes moved in the late afternoon light like slow, enormous birds. The seats there were wider. The lighting was softer. There was something about sitting in that particular spot, visible to the whole lounge, bathed in golden hour light, framed by the glass, that felt like being at the center of something. Diana wanted that seat. She moved toward the window section and stopped. Someone was already there. He was sitting in the corner seat, the best one, the one at the exact curve of the glass where the view was widest. He was a man somewhere in his mid-40s, though it was hard to be certain. He wore dark jeans and a plain white shirt, the collar open, no tie, no jacket. His shoes were clean but not expensive looking. He had a paper cup of tea on the small table beside him, the kind that came from the self-serve station near the entrance, not the kind the attendants brought on trays. He had no laptop open, no phone in hand, no newspaper. He was simply sitting, looking out at the runway, completely still. He did not look like he belonged in a first-class lounge. That was Diana's first thought, and she did not try to talk herself out of it. She had been in enough of these spaces to know the difference between someone who belonged and someone who had slipped through on an upgrade or a corporate card they barely qualified for. This man had the quiet of someone who was waiting to be found out. She walked directly to him. "Excuse me," she said. Her voice was not unkind exactly, but it was the voice of a woman who expected to be heard, and immediately. The man turned his head and looked at her. His eyes were calm, dark brown, steady. He did not seem startled. "This section," Diana said, gesturing at the row of window seats with one manicured hand, "is the premium section. It is reserved for passengers with full first-class access." She let the last 3 words sit for a moment. "Do you have the correct boarding pass for this area?" The man looked at her for a second without speaking. Not in a rude way, not in a slow or dim way. He looked at her the way a person looks at something they are deciding how to handle, brief, clean, unhurried. Then he said, "Please, sit wherever you like." He said it gently, No sarcasm, no edge. He gestured with one hand, a small, open gesture toward the seat beside him, and toward the rest of the lounge as if he were offering it. Diana blinked. She had expected a fumble, an apology, a reaching for a boarding pass, a stammer, a quiet retreat to a less desirable seat closer to the door. She had not expected that. She stood for one more second, recalibrated, and then sat down in the seat beside his, the window seat, the one she had wanted. "Thank you," she said, in a tone that made it clear she had not required his permission. She set her handbag on the table, crossed one leg over the other, and picked up the small menu card from the arm of the chair. An attendant appeared almost immediately, a young woman in a neat uniform, dark hair pulled back, expression professionally pleasant. "What can I get for you?" the attendant asked. "Sparkling water," Diana said, "and a green tea, proper tea, not a bag." She did not look up from the menu card. "Of course." The attendant moved away. Diana set the menu down and looked out the window. The runway stretched long and flat in both directions. A plane was lifting off in the distance, nose tilting upward, catching the last of the afternoon sun on its belly as it climbed. She allowed herself a moment of satisfaction. She was flying to London in 2 hours. A client meeting tomorrow morning, a family in Kensington who wanted their entire ground floor redone, budget unspecified, which was always the best kind. She had spent the last week in Dubai finalizing a project at a new boutique hotel near the marina. It had gone well, better than well. The client had cried, which Diana had learned over the years was the highest possible form of professional praise. She was, at this particular moment, exactly where she was supposed to be. She glanced once at the man in the white shirt. He had turned back to the window. His paper cup was still on the table, half full. He sat with his hands resting in his lap, fingers loose, completely relaxed. He was not performing anything. He was not looking around to see who was watching him. He was just there in that seat in that room, as naturally as furniture. Something about it bothered her, and she could not immediately say why. She looked away and reached into her handbag for her phone. She had emails to read, a proposal to review, a message from her assistant, Claire, who had sent 3 follow-up notes about the Kensington client's request for a specific shade of gray that did not technically exist in any standard paint range. The attendant returned with her water and tea, set them down with a small smile, and left. Diana took a sip of the sparkling water, opened her emails, and told herself she was not thinking about the man in the white shirt. She was, though. She was thinking about the way he had said, "Sit wherever you like," and the way it had not sounded like defeat. It had sounded, she was annoyed to realize, like something else entirely. Like someone who genuinely could not think of a reason not to say it. Like someone for whom the seat, this seat, the best seat, the seat she had wanted and taken, was simply not a thing worth arguing about. She did not like that. Diana Colton had built her entire career on the understanding that spaces had value, and that the people who occupied the best spaces had earned the right to be there. She believed this about rooms, about furniture, about light and proportion, and the way a well-designed chair could communicate authority without saying a word. She believed it about herself. The man in the white shirt was sitting in this lounge, in this section, with a paper cup and plain jeans, and he was radiating something she could not name and could not dismiss. She pulled her attention back to her phone. Outside, another plane began its slow turn on the tarmac, preparing to move toward the runway. The light through the glass was warm and low, the way it gets in the late afternoon when the sun is deciding whether to stay or go. The lounge hummed quietly around them both. Diana read her emails and did not look at the man again. But she was aware of him, the way you are aware of something that does not fit the story you have already written in your head about a room, about a moment, about who belongs where and why. She was aware of him, the way you are aware of a detail that doesn't make sense yet. She would understand it soon enough. The first thing Diana noticed was the men in suits. There were two of them. They came through the lounge entrance together, moving with the kind of focused quiet that people move with when they are not tourists, not travelers passing through, not passengers killing time before a gate call. They were looking for something, or someone. They scanned the room with practiced efficiency, and then they stopped scanning. They had found what they were looking for. Diana watched them walk directly, not toward the check-in counter, not toward the service desk, not toward any of the other well-dressed people seated around the lounge, but toward the man in the white shirt. The man in the white shirt, who had a paper cup of self-serve tea and plain dark jeans, and had offered her his seat as though he were doing her a small, uncomplicated favor. The two men stopped in front of him. They did not sit. They stood, and their posture shifted, shoulders back, hands clasped in front, weight slightly forward, in the way that people stand when they are presenting themselves to someone whose opinion of them matters. The man looked up from the window. He said something to them, low enough that Diana could not hear it from where she sat. One of the suited men responded. The other produced a slim folder from under his arm and held it forward. The man in the white shirt took it, opened it, read the first page, and then closed it again and handed it back. He nodded once. Both men seemed to exhale simultaneously, though they were too controlled to show it obviously. They exchanged 2 or 3 more sentences with him, still standing, still in that careful, attentive posture, and then they stepped back, turned, and walked toward a cluster of seats near the lounge entrance where they sat down together and immediately began talking quietly, heads bent toward each other. Diana set her phone face down on the table. She had been watching this without meaning to, with the slow, unavoidable attention you give to something that is happening just at the edge of your understanding. Her brain was assembling a picture, adding pieces, and the picture was not matching the frame she had built when she first walked over to this man and asked him if he had the correct boarding pass. She picked up her tea. It was good tea, proper like she had asked. She looked at the man. He had already returned to looking out the window, the folder episode apparently concluded, apparently unimportant. His paper cup was still there. He lifted it, took a sip, and set it back down. He was unbothered in a way that was beginning to feel significant. Diana had been in rooms with powerful people for a long time. She knew what wealth looked like when it was trying to be seen. The watches chosen for recognition, the luggage brands that announced themselves, the careful loudness of certain laughs, the deliberate casualness of dropping a name into a sentence. She knew the performance of success extremely well, because for the first decade of her career she had performed it herself, until she no longer needed to. This man was not performing anything. That was what had been bothering her since she sat down, she realized now. Not his clothes, not the paper cup, not the absence of any obvious marker of status. It was the quality of his stillness. It was the fact that he did not seem to need the room to know who he was. The second thing happened 4 minutes later. The lounge manager came across the room. Diana had noticed the manager earlier, a tall man in his 40s, silver at his temples, the kind of quiet, composed presence that senior hospitality staff develop after years of handling everything from lost passports to full-scale disagreements between passengers who should have known better. He moved through the lounge with the efficient grace of someone who had walked this floor 1,000 times and knew every corner of it. He was moving faster now than his usual pace. Not running, nothing as obvious as that. But there was something in his step that was not his usual measured drift, a slight compression of his usual ease, as though the distance between where he was and where he needed to be had become more important than it had been 30 seconds ago. He went directly to the man in the white shirt. He bent slightly at the waist, not a bow exactly, but adjacent to one, and said something. His voice was very low. His expression was the expression of a professional who is making sure everything is correct and is faintly relieved to have the chance to do so. The man in the white shirt listened, said something back, and then smiled slightly. It was a brief smile, private, more for himself than for the manager. The manager straightened, nodded once with a kind of satisfied precision, and then he walked away with the slightly relieved air of a person who has just confirmed that something important is exactly as it should be. Diana watched this. She was watching all of it now, she realized. She had stopped pretending to check her emails. Her phone was on the table. Her tea was going slightly cold. She was watching a man in a plain white shirt with a paper cup of self-serve tea receive. In the space of less than 10 minutes, 2 people in suits bearing folders and a lounge manager who had crossed the room with quiet urgency to make sure everything was to his satisfaction. The third thing was the attendant. The same young woman who had taken Diana's order came back into the window section. Diana assumed she was returning to collect something or to check on another passenger, but the attendant walked past Diana without a glance, went directly to the small table beside the man in the white shirt, and set down a fresh cup. Not a paper cup, a proper cup, white with a small gold rim on a small matching saucer. Steam rose from it. The man had not ordered it. He had not flagged her down, had not lifted a hand or caught her eye. The cup simply appeared beside him, placed with the particular care of someone who has done something many times and knows how it should be done. He looked up at the attendant and thanked her quietly. She nodded and left. He had not asked for it. She had known to bring it anyway. Diana sat very still. She was good at reading situations. This was a professional skill as much as a personal one, honed over 2 decades of walking into clients' homes and understanding within minutes what they actually wanted even when they were saying something entirely different. She could read a room. She could read the subtext of a space, the meaning of small details, the story that furniture and lighting and the way people moved through a place were all quietly telling. The room was telling her something right now. The 2 suited men had come to him. The manager had come to him. The attendant had anticipated him. All of it unprompted, all of it with a quality of attention that was not given to passengers. It was given to someone the staff already knew, already served, already had a specific understanding of. Diana looked at the man. He was sitting with his new cup of tea, looking out at the runway, perfectly at ease. A plane had just landed and was slowing at the far end of the tarmac, its engines winding down to a low roar that came through the glass as barely a vibration. She had walked over to this man 40 minutes ago and asked him if he had the right boarding pass for this section. She thought about that now with a clarity that was not comfortable. She thought about the way she had said it, the particular texture of her voice, the slight lift of her chin, the words she had chosen. This section is the premium section. As though she were informing him of a rule he had broken, as though his presence there were an error that needed correcting. He had said, "Please, sit wherever you like." She had taken it as a retreat. She understood now, sitting in the seat she had claimed, watching the room treat this man with a consistency of quiet deference that had nothing to do with his jeans or his paper cup or any visible marker she had used to measure him. She understood now that it had not been a retreat at all. She was not sure yet what it had been. She did not quite have the full picture. But the picture was nearly complete. She picked up her phone, not to check emails. Her hands just needed something to hold. Outside, the landed plane had come to a full stop. Ground crew moved around it in orange vests, small against the scale of the aircraft. The sun was lower now, the light turning from gold to something more amber, the kind of light that makes everything look like it is being remembered rather than seen. Diana sat in the best seat in the lounge. It did not feel, at this particular moment, like the best seat in the lounge. She looked at the man one more time. He was still looking out the window. He had the posture of someone who had nowhere more important to be, and the ease of someone who had never, not once, needed a room to know who he was. She looked away. The picture was almost complete. She was not sure she was going to like what it showed her. Diana Colton was not a woman who let things sit unresolved. It was the quality her ex-husband had called determination, and her business partner called stubbornness, and her assistant Claire called, privately, behind her back. The thing that makes Diana impossible to work for, and also the reason the company is worth what it is. She moved toward problems. She named things. She preferred clarity to comfort, even when clarity cost something. So she did what she had been stopping herself from doing for the past 45 minutes. She turned to the man in the white shirt and spoke to him. "I hope I am not interrupting," she said. The man turned from the window. His expression was the same as it had been every time she had looked at him, open, unhurried, giving nothing away and taking nothing back. "Not at all," he said. His voice was clear. Southern English, she thought, though it had been rubbed smooth by what sounded like years of travel or education or both. Not posh, not rough, just clear. "I noticed," Diana said, keeping her tone even and conversational, the way she spoke to clients when she was trying to learn something without seeming to ask for it directly, "that you seem to know the staff here fairly well." He considered this for a moment. "In a sense," he said. "Have you used this lounge many times?" she asked. "Yes," he said. "Business travel?" "Mostly," he said. Then after a small pause, though the lines tend to blur. Diana nodded slowly, as though this were a satisfying answer. It was not. She tried a different angle, the way she tried different lighting options in a room until the space revealed its best version. "Are you based in Dubai?" she asked. "Partly," he said. "London as well, and a few other places." "What kind of work?" she asked. It was a direct question, and she knew it. She watched his face for any flicker of annoyance, the slight closing off that people sometimes did when they felt they were being interviewed rather than spoken to. There was none. He answered with the same ease with which he did everything, the ease of someone who had made peace with every question about himself long ago. "Logistics," he said, "and some infrastructure." "Investment?" she asked. "Development," he said, "building things mostly." The investment side came later. Diana nodded. She had a picture of the type, a comfortable, moderately successful man in the infrastructure or property development world, possibly self-made, possibly inherited, probably somewhere in the comfortable middle range of wealth where business lounges were a regular feature of life, but not something you owned. That was still the picture she was working with. She was not paying attention to the thing the room had already been trying to tell her for 45 minutes. She made the mistake she would spend the rest of the evening turning over in her mind. She let the mask of conversation slip, just for a moment, and the real question came out. "It is just," she said, with a smile that was friendly on the surface and had something sharper underneath it, "that I noticed the staff here seemed to treat you differently from the other passengers. The manager came over personally. The attendant brought a fresh cup without being asked. Those two men who came to speak with you." She tilted her head very slightly. "One wonders." The man looked at her. He did not seem offended. He did not seem amused exactly. He seemed like a person who had arrived at a conversational moment he recognized. "What do you wonder?" he asked. It was a genuine question, not a trap, not a challenge. He was asking her to say the thing she was circling, the way a person holds a door open and waits. Diana Colton, who had spent 23 years walking through doors, walked through this one. "I suppose," she said, and her voice still held that polished, pleasant quality, but there was an edge under it now, fine as a wire. "I wonder whether you are perhaps a little out of your usual territory. Whether this particular lounge might be a first or a special occasion, because the staff do seem to be making quite an effort." She finished the sentence with a smile she had used 1,000 times. The one that said, "I am being charming and direct," and also said something much less kind underneath it. The smile you used when you wanted someone to know you had seen through them without giving them the satisfaction of saying it plainly. The man looked at her for a moment. Then he said, "This is not a first occasion, no." "No," Diana said. "No," he said. He picked up his cup of tea, the proper one, the one the attendant had brought without being asked. He held it for a moment and then set it back down. "I helped design this space," he said, "about 6 years ago." Diana felt the first shift, barely perceptible, a degree or two off-center. "You are an architect?" she asked. "No," he said. He said it without elaborating, and the pause that followed had a particular quality, a small silence with a weight in it that she should have recognized. "Then in what capacity did you?" she started. "I own it," he said. Diana stopped. "Sorry," she said. "This lounge," he said. "The design brief, the build, the operating contract. My company holds the partnership with the airport for this terminal." He tilted his head very slightly, a gesture that matched the one she had made at him a few minutes earlier, though without any of the sharpness. "I own the company," he said. "So in a loose sense, yes, I own this lounge." The word own sat between them like a stone set down on a glass surface, careful, precise, undeniable. Diana did not speak. She was processing. She was very good at processing information quickly. It was how she built rooms, how she ran a company, how she read people and spaces and the unspoken requirements behind a client's stated brief. She took information in and assembled it fast. She assembled it now, and what it assembled into was this. She had walked over to this man 47 minutes ago and questioned whether he had the right to be in this section of a lounge that he owned. She had sat in a seat that he had quietly offered her in a lounge that he had built. She had watched his staff attend to him with familiarity and deference, and she had read it as evidence of something that cast doubt on him, rather than evidence of everything she should have understood from the beginning. She had just looked at this man, the man who owned the room, and asked, with a smile she had used to make people feel small, whether the lounge might be a little out of his usual territory. The man looked at her with the same steady, open expression he had worn the entire time. Not triumphant, not cold. He was not enjoying this at the expense of her dignity. He simply was there in his seat in his lounge in his building, exactly as he had been before she sat down beside him. "I hope you enjoy the flight," he said. Then he turned back to the window. Diana opened her mouth. Something moved in her throat, an apology, the beginning of one, or something that might become one if she could locate the right words. She was not a woman who apologized easily or often. She had learned a long time ago that in business, an apology poorly placed could cost you a room, a contract, a client's confidence. She had learned to be strategic about remorse. This did not feel strategic. This felt like standing in a room she had redesigned in her head, certain of its dimensions and its purpose, only to discover that every measurement she had taken was wrong. She closed her mouth. The man was looking out the window again. His tea was there. His stillness was there. The two suited men near the entrance were doing whatever they had been doing. The lounge manager was on the far side of the room, speaking with someone at the service counter. Everything in the room was exactly as it had been. Everything was completely different. Diana sat in the best seat in the lounge, the seat he had offered her without hesitation, without irritation, without any apparent awareness that it meant more to her than it could ever mean to him. And she held her sparkling water, and she did not know what to do with her face or her hands, or the sentence she had just been handed like a mirror. She looked at her reflection in the glass wall instead. Outside, a plane was lifting off, heavy and deliberate, pulling itself upward into the late afternoon sky. She watched it climb until it was small, and then smaller, and then gone. The lounge was very quiet. The man in the white shirt finished his tea. The attendant who came to clear the man's cup did so with the ease of someone who had done it many times before. Her name was Priya, and she had worked in this lounge for 3 years. She knew the space well, the passengers who came through weekly, the ones who came through once and never forgot to mention that they had been here, the ones who used the lounge the way people use a church, finding in its quiet and its order something that the rest of their lives did not provide. She knew the difference between a guest and someone who belonged to the room in a different way. She had known who the man in the white shirt was from the moment he arrived. She always did. She collected his cup, exchanged a few words with him, brief and pleasant, and moved back toward the service area. As she passed Diana Colton, she glanced at her. Diana was sitting with her sparkling water, her phone face down on the table, her hands in her lap. She was looking out the window with an expression that Priya had also learned to recognize over 3 years of watching people sit in this particular section of this particular room. It was the expression of someone who was doing the math. Priya had seen it before, not often but enough. The moment when a person's sense of a room rearranged itself, when the story they had been telling themselves about a space and their place in it turned out to be a different story than the room was actually telling. It was always visible if you knew what to look for. It moved across a face like weather, not dramatic, not loud, just a quiet, systemic shift. She said nothing and went back to the service counter. The man stood up. He did it without ceremony. He had been sitting for about an hour in total, and now the plane was boarding and it was time to go. He picked up his jacket from the arm of the chair, a well-worn dark jacket, simple cut, and shrugged it on. He collected nothing else. He had arrived with nothing and he was leaving with nothing, and this too, Diana would think about later, was something she had misread. He paused. He turned toward Diana. She looked up from the window. Their eyes met. She was still assembling what she wanted to say, still looking for words that would be adequate, that would not cost her more than she could afford to spend, and also not cost her less than the moment required. He spoke first. "Safe flight," he said. That was all. 2 words, even, clean, carrying no freight, no score to settle, no point to prove. He turned and walked through the lounge toward the exit, and the room moved around him, the way rooms move around people who belong to them. Smoothly, without adjustment, without anyone needing to make space because the space was already his. The manager looked up from across the room as he passed and gave a small nod. The man returned it without breaking stride. The 2 suited men rose and fell into step behind him, 3 feet back, slightly to either side, a formation so practiced it looked casual. He walked out. Diana watched him go. She sat in the window seat for another 20 minutes. Her flight was called twice before she moved. She sat there with her untouched sparkling water and the cold remains of her tea, and she looked at the runway, and she thought about things she did not usually allow herself to think about. She thought about the way she had walked across the lounge when she first arrived, the particular angle of her chin, the specific music of her heels on the polished floor. She thought about how much of that walk was involuntary by now, how deeply it had been practiced, how early in her career she had understood that entering a room with authority was a skill like any other, and had developed it accordingly. She thought about what that skill was actually doing, what it was communicating, and to whom and why. She thought about a man in a plain white shirt sitting completely still in a room he owned, radiating nothing, demanding nothing, and the way that stillness had bothered her before she knew what it meant, and the way it clarified now into something she had no comfortable name for. She thought about the word territory. She had used it. Out of his usual territory, she had said, with her pleasant, fine-edged smile. She thought about the specific work that word had been doing in her sentence, the assumption it carried, the thing it revealed about the shape of her thinking. She looked down at her handbag, the limited edition one, the one she had flown to Paris to collect. It was a very beautiful bag. She had earned it in every material sense. She had worked long and hard, and she had succeeded, and she was here, in the premium section of a first-class lounge, and none of that had changed. But the bag was doing something else too, she thought. It was doing the same thing her walk was doing. The same thing her voice did when she spoke to people in rooms she had decided she belonged to and they did not. It was announcing her. She had always thought of this as strength, as the rightful claim of someone who had built something real, as the natural expression of a woman who had fought hard enough and long enough that she no longer needed to be invisible. She was sitting with the possibility, for the first time in a long time, that it was also something else, something smaller, something that had more to do with fear than she liked to admit. The man in the white shirt had not announced himself. He had not needed to. His boarding call came over the intercom. Not her name, his, though she did not know his name yet. She learned it later. She just heard the gate number, heard the lounge begin the gentle shuffle of people gathering their things, and she picked up her handbag and her boarding pass and she stood. The seat was empty beside her. The paper cup was gone. The window was the same window it had always been, the runway the same runway, the light now fully into its evening register, blue and flat and honest. She walked through the lounge toward the exit. Her heels clicked on the floor. She was aware of them in a way she had not been when she walked in. The sound of them, what they cost, what they said. She walked out into the long, bright corridor of the terminal, and the lounge door closed behind her, and the evening moved on. On the plane, Diana Colton did not open her laptop. This was unusual. She was a woman who had spent the last decade using long-haul flights as mobile offices, the hours of altitude giving her the focused clarity that the ground-level rush of her days rarely provided. She was good at working on planes. She had drafted proposals over the Atlantic, revised contracts above the Arabian Sea, made decisions at 38,000 feet that she had been unable to make at sea level. Tonight she closed the window shade and ordered a glass of water and stared at the seat back in front of her. The flight was 7 hours. London in the morning, gray and familiar. The Kensington clients tomorrow, their brief about a specific shade of gray that did not technically exist, yet somehow absolutely had to be found. Claire's 3 messages. The next project and the one after that, and the years ahead of them, moving forward in the way her life had always moved forward, determined, precise, deliberate. She thought about the man. His name she learned 4 days later, and not from him. It was Marcus Webb. Her business partner, a man named Colin, sent her the article. He sent it in an email with no subject line and no message in the body, just a link and his initials. Colin communicated this way when he wanted to tell her something without telling her directly, which she had always found exasperating, and which she now, receiving this particular message, found something approaching merciful. She opened the link. Marcus Webb, 52. Originally from Coventry, though the family had moved to London when he was 8. His father had worked in manufacturing. His mother had worked in administration for a small local council. He had started his first company at 24, a small logistics coordination business, with money he had saved over 6 years while working in freight management. The logistics company had grown. A second company followed, then a third, absorbing the first 2 over time into something larger and more complex. At 37, his infrastructure development company had entered into a partnership with a private airport management group. It was this partnership that led, eventually, to the terminal project in Dubai. The design brief, the build, the operating contract, the lounge. The article called him, in the first paragraph, one of the most significant self-made figures in British logistics and infrastructure development in the past decade. It then immediately moved into the specifics of his companies and their valuations, and the number of people they employed, which ran into the tens of thousands. There was a photograph. He was wearing a suit in it, which was the only reason she recognized him. The face was the same face, but the suit made him look like someone a person would identify on first glance as powerful. Without it, in plain jeans and a white shirt in a lounge, he had looked like no one. He had looked like nothing. He had looked like exactly what he was, which was a person sitting in a chair, and she had seen the jeans and the paper cup and the absence of performance, and she had read it as evidence of lesser things. Diana set her phone down. She was in her office. The Kensington project was in full motion. The specific gray had been sourced, as it always was, because Diana Colton did not fail to source specific things she had promised to source. Claire was in the adjoining room. The day was busy, the way her days were always busy, full and purposeful and moving. She sat for a moment in the way she had sat in the lounge, not moving, not checking anything, not performing anything. She thought about something she had read once, years ago, in an interview with an architect whose work she respected. He had been asked what separated spaces that felt important from spaces that merely looked important. He had said, "The spaces that feel important have stopped trying to prove it." She had agreed with this entirely when she read it. She had built her practice around this principle. She believed in the authority of understatement, in the power of a room that knew what it was. She had not, until 4 days ago in an airport lounge, applied this principle to people. She had not turned it on herself. She thought about the first client she ever had. A young couple in East London, small flat, very little budget, enormous hope. She had been 28, operating out of that rented cupboard office, no portfolio worth showing, no reputation to trade on. She had sat across from them at their kitchen table and listened to them for an hour, and then she had solved their problem so cleanly and so well that they had cried, which was, she understood only now, turning it over, the same response she had gotten last week from the hotel client in Dubai. 23 years between those two moments. In the first one, she had walked into that East London flat with nothing to announce. She had simply been there, listening, working. It had been enough. More than enough. She thought about when that had changed, when the walk had developed its particular angle, when the voice had acquired its particular edge, when the bag had become a statement and the entrance a performance. It had been gradual, she thought. Erosion worked both ways. It could hollow something out, or it could wear away everything that was not essential. She was not sure, sitting here now, which kind had been happening to her. She was not comfortable with the uncertainty. But she was sitting with it, which was different from her usual response to uncertainty, which was to move toward it and resolve it as quickly as possible. This one she was leaving open. She picked up her phone and looked at the photograph again. The man in the suit, who was the same man who had said, "Please, sit wherever you like," with complete ease in a room where he had every right to ask her to move. He had not asked her to move. He had given her the window seat. She thought about that for a long time. 3 weeks later, Diana was in a meeting in a hotel conference room in Birmingham. It was a new client, a mid-size hospitality group, expanding their portfolio, looking for a design partner for a chain of boutique properties across the Midlands. They were represented at the meeting by 4 people: their chief executive, their operations director, their brand manager, and a 4th person who had been introduced briefly at the start of the meeting, and then moved to the chair at the far end of the table. The 4th person was young, early 30s, Diana estimated. He was wearing clothes that were clean and presentable and entirely unremarkable. He sat slightly apart from the others, said very little, and spent most of the first hour watching the room with the kind of focused attention that did not look like passivity. Diana noticed him early. She noticed things. It was her gift and her practice. Midway through the meeting, the chief executive referred a question to him. "I'd want Oliver's view on that," she said, and everyone at the table oriented toward the young man at the far end. He answered simply and directly. His answer was good, better than good, precise and rooted, in an understanding of the project that suggested he had been paying deep attention to everything said and unsaid in the room for the past 60 minutes. Diana looked at him. She thought, here is a person who does not need you to know who he is. She adjusted the way she spoke to him for the rest of the meeting. She stopped performing toward him and started listening. She asked him 2 questions directly, which she had not done in the first hour. His answers were both worth more than she expected, though she had stopped expecting things and started simply observing, which was different. The meeting ended well. The contract, as it turned out, came through. Later, Claire asked her how it had gone. Good, Diana said. Interesting group. The young one, Claire asked because Claire always noticed. Oliver, Diana said, yes, worth watching. She said it without the particular inflection she would have used 3 weeks ago, the one that placed watching at a slight distance, the way you watched something that had not yet earned closer attention. She said it the way you say something about a room that surprised you, a room you had walked into expecting one thing and found another, and found yourself glad of it. She gathered her things and went back to her office. The project in Birmingham was a good one. She was already thinking about the light in those hotel rooms, the specific quality of the Midlands morning light, gray and soft, and full of an underestimated subtlety. She was thinking about how to build rooms that did not need to announce themselves. Rooms that simply were. She had been doing this for 23 years, and she was still learning. She thought briefly of a window seat in Dubai, and a man looking out at a runway, and a paper cup of tea, and 5 words spoken without triumph. Then she opened her laptop and went back to work.